Hello guys, this is where we had left off the last time, taking a look at, if you did the exercise from the optional part of the video. Anyways, today we'll talk about functions, and these are very important, extremely important. So let's go ahead and take a look at what functions are. Okay, so I'm going to create a new file here as usual, clicking the new file button. Just type in functions.cpp. As you can see, it instantly recognizes that it's a C++ file because of the extension .cpp. Right? So let's get started with the usual stuff. Hash include iostream using namespace std int main. Okay, now all this time you have seen me and probably a few others type things inside this int main thing, right? Even in this we did this, even in this program we wrote something in int main. So what exactly is int main? Int main is a function. You write a function when you want to group some code together, okay, a couple of lines of code. Now, most C++ programs have int main. A C++ program, a traditional C++ program, cannot function without this int main function. It is extremely essential. Okay, so let's take a look at some documentation. So it says a function is a group of statements that together perform a task. Every C++ program has at least one function, which is main, as I just said. All the most trivial programs can define additional functions. So you can't get away without writing int main with traditional C++, right? And it groups together a few lines of code, and you're supposed to do it, or you're supposed to make functions for, you can say, dividing your program into different tasks, right? Each function does one particular thing. Okay, so if you take a look at this again, you can divide your code into separate functions. But logically, the division usually is such that each function performs a specific task. I hope that much was clear. So a function performs a specific task, right? So you can have a big program performing multiple things. So, okay, for example, suppose you're writing a program for a calculator. So you can have one function which performs the addition. You can have one function which performs the subtraction, one function for multiplication, one function for division, so on and so forth. If it's a scientific calculator, you can have functions for your trig functions like sine and cos and tan, right? And much more advanced as we move on to calculators, right? But in the end, all your program is doing is simulating a calculator, right? Now, you can have all of that code inside your main function. No one's going to say anything. No one's going to refuse, and logically it's not wrong. But generally you should avoid doing that. You should use functions to divide up your program into separate logic. Okay? A function declaration tells the compiler about a function's name, a return type, and parameters. We'll discuss that in a couple of seconds. Right? So I hope that was clear. Now if we take a look back at this program that we wrote the last time, let me copy paste this, only this bit. Okay, so I can give you an example of how you can utilize this function thing, right, before we move on to return types and parameters. Yes? Okay, so let's try to logically break down what's happening inside this. First of all, I declared 3 integers here. Then I have a couple of cout, cin statements. and then I have a couple of if and else if statements, right? So logically speaking, there are three things happening in here. One, I am declaring. Second, I am having some cout cin, some input output, and the logic. Okay, so we can have functions. We can break this code up into several functions. So let's try that. So right above my int main, I'm going to create a new function. The way to do that is you need to use void, and we'll get into what void is in just a minute. And the name, you want to give the function a name. And now you can go ahead and call it anything, fun1, right? But you should name your functions according to what they're doing, okay? Because when you're writing shorter programs, it doesn't really matter. You just have a couple of functions in a single program, it's all right, okay? But when you're moving or when you're writing longer programs, longer scripts for software development, game development, where the number of lines can easily exceed 500, do you really think having functions called F1, F2, F3, F4 is going to help you distinguish between what is doing what? No. So I always say this, name your functions, name your variables accordingly. Don't just name them for the sake of naming them, which is why I did this, number 1, number 2, number 3. I could have last time gone ahead and called this IJK. It wouldn't have really mattered. The logic remains the same. But like I said, always name your functions, your variables according to what they are, or what you want them to do, right? So we can have one function for our input output statements. So I'll have void input output, okay? And this is the syntax of a function. After the function name, you're supposed to have circular brackets. You may or may not have a space in between. That's just how I do things, right? Everybody has a different style of doing things. This is just my style. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this up here. So yes, you can do that in VS Code. Just select everything and drag it. Now the problem is, if you've noticed, this main function does not recognize number 1, number 2, number 3. The reason for that is, we'll get into the reason of that in another video. So make sure you're subscribed for that. For now, to solve this issue, I'm just going to move this up here. And that solved the issue. Okay, let's make sure that we are properly aligned. All right, we'll have space. Okay. And also we can have another function here, void, now dealing with the logical part. So void, literally going to call it logical part. Again, the same thing, circular brackets followed by curly brackets. Your code or your lines of code goes inside this curly brackets. Now you may have seen some people, or you may like doing your curly brackets like this. If that's the case, I have no issues. But again, like I said, I like mine like this. So let's move this bit in here. All right. Let's save and see what happens. I'm going to save by pressing Ctrl S, Command S, or if you're on a Mac, and I'll hit the play button. It's compiling. Nothing. It compiled. Why do you think nothing happened? Is it that my functions don't work? That's not the case. The reason is that, yes, we have gone ahead and declared our functions, but we have not called them anywhere. Your functions, no matter how correct or incorrect they are, they will not come into the picture, or they will not be called unless you do that specifically. You must call every function that you write. in traditional C++ programming, the calling part occurs in this main method. Okay, so the only thing that we have to do to call them is write the name of the function. So I'll just write, what's the first thing that we're doing? We're declaring, we're having our input output statements. All right, so let's do that. We called that function input output. So when I start typing input output, the tooltip recognizes that I have an input output function here, and you can just double click this and it'll give you, but that's not it. You need to follow this by circular brackets and a semicolon. That means that you've successfully called that function. Okay. Next, we need to call our logical part. Okay, let me go ahead and rename that so that, okay. So logical part, here we go, it's detected. You can press enter as well if you don't want to double click, followed by circular brackets, semicolon. Okay, since there are no errors, I'm going to save and hit the play button. There we go. Same as last time, I can have 1, 2, 3. The largest is 3. As easy as that. So I would always suggest that when you're writing code, divide your program into functions. Yes? It's extremely important. Now, okay, talking about return types. Yes? Now, return types are associated with the function, of course. Okay, jokes apart, whenever you write a function, you write that particular function to perform some task. When that said task is performed, you want some output. You want some sort of an output. It can be a numerical output or whatever it is. Right? So in this case, we just have a couple of if statements. Right? In this case, we just have a couple of console input output statements. So yes, but we are expecting some sort of an output. And that part is what return type is. A return type of a function tells you or gives you an idea of what type of value that particular function is returning. The most common one is void. Void means like practically nothing, right? Think of void as the space stuff, you know, space, void. Yeah, think of void as that. So when you say it's into the void, that means a whole big value, but here it's not a big value. We don't really expect any sort of numerical value when you put void in, right? You can have all sorts of other return types as well. The return types and data types have the same syntaxes. So you can have int. We've been using int main for a long time, since it expects int expects some sort of an integer value to be returned. Now in older versions of C++, what used to happen was you had to type in return 0 in your int main, but the newer versions you don't need to do that. But in the older versions you had to do that, because you had to specify, like, if you want returning any integer value, then it simply wouldn't work. But now they fixed it and you don't need to type in return 0. Assuming, of course, that you are using the version that I am using, or if you're watching this in the future, then well done. Anyways, let's take a look at the documentation and see what it says. A function may return a value. The return type is the data type of the value the function returns. Some functions perform the desired operations without returning a value. Like I said, this particular function or this particular function, we're not really returning any value. In this case, the return type is the keyword void, because it's not really returning something. So like I said, void is the most common one, but you can have functions which have, you know, bool, right? You can have bool, you can have even float if you want, right? You can have all sorts of things. anyways. But yes, if you are using bool or float, you need to return a bool value or a float value. Let's take a look at the documentation a little more. Let's see what else there is. There's an example here. Function returning the max between two numbers. Okay, so this is a function which returns the maximum of two numbers. Function declaration also we have discussed. Calling a function. Okay. So I hope you have understood what it is, what functions are. Now, I specifically did not discuss parameters in this video, because to discuss parameters, we need to take a look at a more in-depth look at variables and the types of variables, as I said in one of my previous videos. Right? So in the next video, we'll take a look at variables and see what different types of variables there are and how they can help you. But for now, that's it. Have a good day. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you loved the video, hit the subs button. And if you did not love the video, well, hit the button anyways. Because there is no because. The world is full of becauses. Why do you always need a because? You don't always need to do something because there's a reason behind it. Just do it for the sake of doing it, okay? Bye-bye. See you next time.